So what made Jill Valentine so integral for the Resident Evil franchise? Because we've seen her make so many appearances from all the different RE titles, from her debut from the classic Resident Evil, where we see her fight the many hordes of monsters in the Spencer estate, to her major role in Resident Evil 3, and how she fought the famous tyrant Nemesis, to all the way to Resident Evil 5, and how she shows off her many new abilities. So in this video, we'll be covering the evolution of Jill Valentine throughout the years, and see how she progressed as a character throughout the franchise, where we also cover her important roles in each of those games, and we'll even delve into what she'll be like in a potential Resident Evil 3 remake in the future. Anyways, my name is DeVuH, and I do cover a lot of Resident Evil content on my channel, so if you guys are interested in seeing more in the future, then please feel free to smash that like and subscribe button for more content like this in the future. Alright, so let's start off with the very first Resident Evil installment, with the classic RE1.
No! Don't go!
Where we watch her major role as a co-protagonist alongside Chris Redfield, as they set up the foundation to the survival horror genre that we know today. Anyway, so Jill got herself into this predicament due to her being part of the STARS Alpha Team, which was a special forces unit of the Raccoon City's police department, where a select few individuals are sent on high-stakes missions, in which in this case, the STARS Alpha Team was sent to search for the missing STARS Bravo Team.
Alpha Team is flying around the forest zone situated in northwest Raccoon City, where we're searching for the helicopter of our compatriots Bravo Team, who disappeared during the middle of our mission.
So Jill Valentine and company got themselves entangled with the monsters at the Arklay Mountains, having no other choice but to take shelter inside the Spencer mansion. But unbeknownst to them, this estate was actually part of the Umbrella's territory, being used as a facility to conduct their many inhumane experiments. So if we chose Jill as our main character, our task was to look for Chris, because he somehow went missing after their encounter with some of the Cerberuses and exploring the mansion. So throughout her journey in Resident Evil 1, we found out why there are so many monsters inside the Spencer estate, at the same time exploring the many maze-like environments and how her and the other STARS members interacted, especially with this.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
And later on, we find out there was a traitor amongst them, which I wonder who that could be. But even with all the obstacles in front of her, we still see Jill make it out of the Spencer estate after going up against one of the earlier versions of the Tyrant, a humanoid b.o.w. who is able to assimilate with the T-virus, and is used by Umbrella to do his many objectives. Also, I'd like to mention that Resident Evil 1 did get a remaster or remake of sorts, with having a graphics fidelity very similar to Resident Evil 0, which looks phenomenal, and the script rewritten so the dialogue wouldn't be much of a meme compared to the classic version.
But how about you, Barry?
I have this.
But overall, we get the privilege to see Jill Valentine again go through the same horror in this RE1 remake, but with the added amazing graphics and the many small additions to this game. Anyways, moving on now to the year 1999, with Jill Valentine again at the center of the Resident Evil universe, as we watch her take the lead as the main protagonist in Resident Evil 3. Where she decided to stay behind in Raccoon City to investigate more into Umbrella, letting Chris Redfield go on ahead and make his way to the Umbrella branch of Europe. But in doing so, Jill would continue her broadcast of making the people of Raccoon City aware of what has happened at the Spencer mansion, trying to shed light on the atrocities of the Umbrella Corporation. But unfortunately for her, no one still believed her. Even Marvin Branagh explained this in the classic Resident Evil 2.
Chris and the other STARS members discovered that Umbrella was behind everything.
So with this conclusion, she decided to leave the city once and for all, which would have her placed at the very start of RE3, where we have her escape her apartment building and eventually try to make her way to the RPD station, possibly trying to see if it was still a safe haven of sorts before her escape. But unfortunately for her, this would be one of the biggest mistakes she would ever make, because not only is the police station already infested with monsters, but this would be the start of her confrontation with Nemesis, a tyrant sent by Umbrella to eliminate the remaining STARS members, which is understandable due to the information that they know about their illegal experiments and their research into the T-virus. So now, Jill not only has to deal with the many zombies in her way, but is now dealing with a tyrant who is in a constant pursuit of her, which leads to the many boss battle encounters with Nemesis, ranging from the restaurant or Raccoon City Press, through her battles with him inside the cable car. But the most significant encounter that Jill would have with her fights with Nemesis was at the clock tower area, because this would be the boss battle that would cause her to be infected with a T-virus, which would lead her to eventual creation of the antibodies for the future viral strains. Which would pique the interest of Albert Wesker, and consequently provide her with a chemical compound that would give her superhuman abilities, which I'll be discussing more later in the video when we get to see her in Resident Evil 5. Anyways, like I mentioned earlier, Jill would be infected with a T-virus by Nemesis, but she would come out on top out of this battle, allowing Carlos to take care of her after the boss encounter, where he would get a vaccine from the Raccoon City Hospital. This in turn would let the T-virus within Jill to be dormant for years, freeing her from the terrible repercussions of being fully infected by this viral strain. Anyways, her journey throughout Resident Evil 3 would continue on after receiving the vaccine, where she would come face to face to Nemesis once again, but this time, you finally get to see her end this monster once and for all.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
Anyway, so far, we've seen Jill go through so much already from her first 2 Resident Evil installments, but her journey doesn't end here, because her next adventure would be with Chris Redfield, when they go on a mission to take down Umbrella, and come face to face with a man who serves as a foundation for the many tyrants that we see in Resident Evil, which was Sergei Vladimir, an individual who was genetically viable to become a tyrant, which the Umbrella Corporation used to their advantage to create some of the most well-known tyrants that we've seen in this franchise, with one in particular was Mr. X from Resident Evil 2 and RE2 Remake. Anyways, both Jill and Chris would make short work out of Sergei, continuing their adventure to stop bioterrorism, which would lead to their establishment of the BSAA, or Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, which was an organization whose sole purpose was to counter bioterrorism around the globe, preventing companies like Umbrella from ever causing the same catastrophe like the Raccoon City incident. Also, as a founding member, Jill Valentine has truly set her ways above and beyond herself, being a pillar to stop all the crazy b.o.w.s that get in her way, which eventually leads to her encounter with Albert Wesker again, just prior to the events of Resident Evil 5, because it was known that both her and Chris were given intel about the famous Dr. Oswald E. Spencer's whereabouts, who's one of the co-founders of the Umbrella Corporation, but once arriving at the estate, they instead were met with a familiar face from their previous journeys.
Wesker!
As we watch Wesker overpower the 1-star's members, showing off his superhuman capabilities, but the subsequent events would have Jill sacrificing her life for Chris, lunging into Wesker as we watch both characters meet their supposed end, because Chris and the rest of the BSAA attempted to locate her after this incident, but failed to do so, declaring Jill officially dead. But with a small twist that happens in Resident Evil 5, we encounter what they called the Bird Lady, who I already suspected to be Jill Valentine from the get-go, which of course happens to be true when we get these scenes right here.
So slow to catch on.
Jill.
So now Jill, like Albert Wesker, appears to have the same superhuman strength and speed, which made us wonder how in the world did Jill acquire such powers. But luckily, I can explain how she acquired these superhuman capabilities, because remember when I mentioned earlier that Jill got infected with a T-virus during her fight with Nemesis in Resident Evil 3? Well, what actually happened was the vaccine that Carlos gave Jill actually made the T-virus go dormant for years, allowing her body to slowly create antibodies towards this strain, which Albert Wesker found out after putting her in cryostasis, which the machine showing some abnormalities within her body. So now with this revelation, Wesker put Jill's antibodies to further use with his research into the Ouroboros strain, making it less volatile as we know it, and allowing it to assimilate with the host if deemed genetically worthy. Also during this time, Wesker had the plan of using Jill for not only his experimental research, but also as a way to get back at Chris, using Jill as a means to hurt him not just physically, but also mentally and psychologically.
Have fun watching Jill suffer.
Wait, what did you do to her?
While at the same time, Wesker implanted Jill with a device that injected her with a chemical compound derived from all the viral progenitor research that he's done, being called P30, a performance-enhancing agent that allows his users to be capable of doing all the Matrix-like abilities that we saw with Jill and Wesker, with the machine itself attached to her chest, and allowed her to give a certain amount of dose of the P30 chemical, allowing her to retain her powers for an extended time due to it only having a short half-life, which would later be stripped away from Jill after Chris was able to remove the P30 machine off her chest, freeing her from Wesker's control, and is now back to being her usual self.
Chris. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
So all in all, the evolution of Jill Valentine throughout the years has seen her go through a lot of growth and changes, from being a member of the STARS team without any prior knowledge to bioterrorism, to being one of the founders of the BSAA and her involvement in Resident Evil 5, because she's truly been one of the main staples in this franchise, and I think this series wouldn't be as successful if it wasn't for her involvement in all the bioterrorism incidents. Also, like I mentioned earlier, since we may have a potential Resident Evil 3 remake coming up in the future, I'd like to discuss what would Jill be like in that game, which I hope we get the same trope from the classic version, with her continuing her awesome way of handling Nemesis and retaining those one-liners.
What? Keep dreaming.
Also, maybe adding some flashbacks to her first adventure in Resident Evil 1 and how that would affect her throughout her journey in RE3. Anyways, what do you guys think about Jill Valentine overall? Was she your favorite character, or was there another character that you think was better? Also, I just want to point out that I didn't mention Jill with her involvement in the first Resident Evil Revelations because I'm in the process of making a separate video about Jill and that game overall. So if you're interested in that, then please let me know in the comment section down below. Anyways, I truly appreciate you guys watching my evolution of Jill Valentine video, and I hope you guys enjoy the content. Anyways, again, thank you guys so much, and as always, you guys have a great rest of your day, and this is Hey DeVuH, signing out.